There's so much uncertainty with what's going to happen to our economy and our property markets. How do you plan to retire? How do you formulate a strategic property plan? That's one of the questions we answer today in the first of a series of question and answer podcasts. Today I'm going to have a chat with Brett Warren, National Director of Metropole, to answer some of your questions, including how to formulate a plan today, what the end game should be, considering that the world of finance has changed and you can't really live off equity like you used to be in the old days. One of the other questions we're going to talk about is how many properties you're going to need to retire comfortably. And what if you don't want to wait 20, 30 years like a lot of people say you need to wait? What can you do to speed up your wealth creation? Plus a heap of other questions. So at the end of today's show, you should have answers to some of the common questions investors like you are asking, so you'll have a bit more direction and clarity about moving forward in these challenging times. So welcome to today's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's most trusted property commentator who has once again been voted Australia's leading property investment advisor. That's the fifth time he's won a similar award in the last 7 years.
Well, as I said in the introduction, today we're going to have a talk about your common questions that are being left on our website or left on the podcast. And the most common one we get is, how many properties do I need to retire? So to discuss that and some associated questions, I've got with me my business partner and National Director of Metropole, Brett Warren. Welcome, Brett.
Hi, Michael. Good to be with you.
Now, how often do people ask you that question? Well, how many properties do I need?
Well, it's the old saying, isn't it? If I had $1 for every time, I'd probably be a very, very rich man.
Even richer than you are today. I guess the next one is, how long is it going to take? And we're going to talk about that one as well. But maybe before I allow you to answer that question, I guess we've got to really understand that we've got to begin with the end in mind. You've got to know where you want to get to, and you've got to understand what your time frames are. The problem is, between now and then, and it's probably going to take 10, 15, 20, and for some people even 30 years to build a big enough cash machine from their properties to retire. There's going to be so many changes in the time you've been investing, Brett, in the time I've been investing. We've had to change our strategy. So years ago, we used to talk about the living off equity strategy, and that still works for a small group of people, but not for the majority of investors. Today, there's more restrictive lending criteria. That's actually been much that way since the global financial crisis. And I think there's going to be lots more changes moving forward. Look, I don't know if the government of the day, when you, eventually, the person listening to this, is going to want to live off their property portfolio. I don't know whether the government's going to allow you to negatively gear or not. I've got no idea what interest rates are going to be. I don't know whether you're going to be able to borrow in your self-managed super fund, negatively gear in your super fund, whether there's going to be capital gains tax exemptions. No one knows what the bank policies are going to be, whether they're going to allow you to have interest-only loans or whatever. What I do know, though, is that if between now and then you build a substantial property portfolio, a multi-million-dollar property portfolio, plus you've got other assets, you're going to have choices. And if you don't, you're not going to have choices. It's as simple as that. It takes time, and you've got to do it in the right order. You've actually got to accumulate your assets first and then live off the cash flow, don't you, Brett?
You're exactly right, Michael. And I guess it's we say finding a level of certainty in uncertain times. And look, this isn't going to be the only point in history where there will be uncertain times over the next decade or two. I think if you look back over history, there's always something, there's always an X factor. So it's finding a level of certainty and heading towards that. That is important at the end of the day.
Well, the certainty here is it's a system, it's a framework that's worked for other people. Now, I know there's people who will tell you different ways of doing things. We can go through it. But I guess you've got to start with the end in mind. Brett, when you sit with clients and you speak to them, do they usually know where they want to end up?
No. In a short term, no. I think it's very, very rare that we come across someone who knows exactly where they want to be and they're heading in that direction. I think a huge number of property investors get it wrong because they don't start with the end in mind. And obviously, Michael, that's one of the success habits for highly effective people. I like to use the analogy of a holiday. Think about the last time you went on holiday. You knew exactly where you were flying to. You knew the hotel you were staying at. You knew the sights and sounds you were going to. So you knew the end. You had that in mind. However, most property investors jump into a plane and hope they end up in Hawaii or America or the UK or something.
Well, I guess that's because they find a property that they like. They think property is the answer. So it's close to where they live, close to where they holiday or where they want to retire. And then they work backwards from that, which is the wrong way around. You've got to understand what your goal is. And I guess the goal is to replace your personal exertion income along the way. And when we sit down with clients, I remember years ago when I did this 20 years ago, they all wanted $100,000. And surprisingly, still today, that figures in their mind as well, Brett.
Look, it certainly is. And I think the danger is that people want to start replacing their exertion income today, that they chase cash flow. They think if they can, buy half a dozen properties that are giving them enough cash flow, in the next 5 or 10 years, magically they'll be able to slow down and retire and sit on a beach. But it just doesn't work like that, unfortunately.
No, it doesn't. So first of all, you've got to understand how much you want in today's dollar value. It's just too hard to do it moving forward. And let's say it is $100,000 or $150,000. The next question, of course, is before tax or after tax. They don't think about that. So if you want to have $100,000 to live off and assume that your mortgage is paid off, so you can use it to enjoy your life, $100,000 in today's dollar value, you probably have to earn $150,000, $160,000 and then pay tax. Having said that, people are then saying, well, I got super. Won't my super be enough? But I think we've learned today that in the current climate, superannuation, I don't know whether the government's going to be able to pay a pension or how much super you're going to have or whether your super fund is going to be decimated in half like it was earlier this year. So, yes, take advantage of your super, assume that you're going to have some, but I'm not sure you can really count on your superannuation or your government because they can change the laws, they can change the goalposts, you don't have control.
And that's the dangerous thing. It's about taking control of your future. I remember at the last election, and along with negative gearing, there was also talk of taxing super, Michael. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if 10 or 20 years down the track that there's some kind of impact to superannuation there. So as we said at the start, it's really about taking control of your future, not relying on the government with pensions or, superannuations and things like that. So it's almost like we're starting another business here, Michael. We're taking a step back. We're not just focusing on a property and rushing out and buying something. We're taking a step back and making sure we're widening and building our asset base with high quality assets. We've got cash buffers in place to ride out times like we've got at the moment. And we're treating it like a business. So it's not just a property, a speculating type of thing. There's actually a plan and a strategy that we're working towards.
Okay, well, if I've got an end game in mind, how many properties should I aim at, Brett?
The $1 million question. Well, look, it really depends, doesn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, one of my favourite sayings is it's about quality, not quantity. So as we've talked about before, I'd probably prefer to own one Westfield shopping centre in an A-grade location rather than 20 or 30 regional properties. So it's about having a good quality asset. And unfortunately, in these times, maybe a decade or so ago, there was talk about 10 properties in 10 years, and it just can't be done these days. So the fact that you've got to have quality assets over the quantity assets is much more important, and that's really going to dictate how many properties you need.
Well, interestingly, recently the tax department has put out the statistics of how many property investors there are in Australia, how many property investors own 6 or more properties, and you can actually dig into the tax figures. And you and I are more the big picture people, but our business partner, Kate Forbes, dug into it to see how many people own 6 or more properties. And in Australia, there was just over 20,000. But interestingly, then you can see how much tax they pay. Now, you could say, well, yeah, they've actually got a depreciation and negative gearing, but it was actually less than 1,000, in fact, 700 people in Australia with 6 or more properties who had a taxable income of $500,000. There was only a couple of thousand who actually had a taxable income of $100,000. In other words, lots of people have got these properties, but I know you've seen them. That properties actually just aren't working for them and aren't giving them the cash flow that they're hoping for.
Certainly, yeah, and look, we often see people that come in with half a dozen properties, and they've kind of been trapped a little bit, I guess, Michael, because if you're focusing on the cash flow and all of a sudden, your rents drop or interest rates rise, and you're stuck with properties that are underperforming, and leads us to another common thought, Michael, that the property's not costing them anything. And look, in a financial sense, it may not be, but certainly as an opportunity cost, there could be a huge cost involved.
Well, I know some people are then going to say, well, why can't I just live off the rent? Why do I have to build this big property portfolio? So here's why. Let's say you want that annual income of $100,000 after tax. How are you going to achieve it? How many properties are you going to need? That's what we're asking. Well, if you plan to eventually pay down your debt and live off your rent, because you've actually got to have no mortgage to be able to live off the rent, you're probably going to need your home outright, no mortgage, and at least $6 million worth of properties with no mortgage to get $100,000 after tax. Now, I know somebody's thinking there as they're listening to this, no, that's not true. I've read I can do it with 3 or 4 properties. Well, in Australia at the moment, the average gross yield for well-located properties in Australia is around 3%. This means if you eventually own $1 million worth of property with no debt, you've paid off all your mortgages, you're going to receive 3%, 30,000 rent. But of course, you're going to have to pay your rates and land tax and managing agent's commission and repairs, which will leave you with much less than $30,000 a year. And you're then going to have to pay tax on that income. So, as I said, $1 million, 30 of property, no debt, $30,000 rent, and then you've got those outgoings. So when you do the sums, you need to have, I don't know, maybe $5, maybe $6 million worth of unencumbered properties to earn $100,000 a year after outgoings and after your tax. Now remember, that's $5 to $6 million worth of property noted in today's dollar value. If you've got mortgages against them, or if it's in future dollar value, you're going to need more than that. So let me ask you a question. Will you really be able to save $6 million over the next, 10, 20, 30 years that you're investing? And most of you won't have that long a runway. Will you ever be able to build a property portfolio that size on the few dollars a week you're going to have positive cash flow during the journey along there? So in my mind, the only way to become financially independent through property is first grow a substantial asset base by buying high growth properties and manufacturing some capital growth to speed things up, and then you transition to the next stage, the cash flow stage, by lowering your loan to value ratios, reducing your debt. But in fact, I don't think you should be paying off your debt altogether. So maybe to set some context to this, when people ask these questions, I know, Brett, we talk about the 3 stages of wealth, what they have to go through.
Yeah. So look, the first stage is obviously building that asset base and getting their asset base wider. It's not targeting a certain number of properties. As part of the process, we're talking about building an asset base. We have to diversify our portfolio. We have to get high growth investment grade assets that are going to grow in value faster. As you said before, I think even for the majority of our listeners, even if we doubled their incomes tomorrow, Michael, they're not going to be able to save $5 or $6 million in that period of time anyway. So it's not your exertion income that's going to be able to create a level of wealth for you. It's going to be your assets that are going to do the majority of the heavy lifting. So it's really important during that first phase that we get the right kind of assets that are going to grow in value significantly faster.
Mm-hmm. Well, interestingly, when you think about it, when you do retire, and you may not retire, you may want to still keep working part-time like Brett and I, but when you get to that stage, most of what you own isn't going to be the money you saved. It's not going to be the rent you got. It's not going to be the wages you've got. It's actually going to be, if you get it right, if you do it right, it's actually going to be the untaxed capital growth. So the fact that you can grow your asset base and not pay tax on it, while you do pay tax on your income and you do pay tax on your rent, that's going to be the majority of your wealth when you retire. So first stage, Brett, as you say, is asset growth. What's the next stage?
The next stage is consolidating. So the strategy changes slightly because your asset base should be wide enough. So a lot of the time, if it hasn't been done before this stage, I'd like to come back and maybe add some value to the assets. Potentially do a renovation or potentially do a development to boost the value, but importantly, Michael, also boost the cash flow. because the next phase is really about starting to lower those debt levels and lower your loan to value ratios. So a renovation or development can really impact on the cash flow. It can increase the cash flow, increase the yields we're looking for. And for the next phase, it's really about lowering down and paying down most of that debt. And as we've spoken about before, we would generally target the non-deductible debt to start with.
Sure, your home, for example. So how do you lower your loan-to-value ratios? Well, you grow your portfolio more slowly. I mean, if you're 4 or 5 years before your retirement, it's unlikely you should be adding more highly leveraged properties. So you don't add as many properties to your portfolio and you let leverage and time and compounding work for you. Or over time, you should be converting to principal and interest loans to slowly lower your loan to value ratio. So I'm talking about how you transition to that phase, Brett, that you're talking about. Often, as you build already a substantial portfolio, we suggest adding commercial properties, which are really cash flow positive properties to your portfolio, but they're very, very different to the sort of cash flow positive properties you get in mining towns or regional areas, Brett.
They certainly are, and the focus here is the cash flow. So you're not getting the cash flow at the start while you're trying to build your asset base. It comes later when you're looking to lower your loan to value ratios and increase the cash flow side of things, as we mentioned before.
Well, commercial property gives you a balance because you still get increase in value, but not as strongly as residential real estate, and you've got cash flow plus lots of great depreciation. Now, we're not allowed to give advice with regard to superannuation. That's a financial product, but I know a lot of people use their superannuation, if the advisor recommends it, if it's appropriate for their circumstances, to sell some assets from the self-managed super fund, which under the current legislation wouldn't attract capital gains tax. And then if you're the right age and it works for you, you could distribute some of those funds to yourself to get rid of some of your debt outside the super fund, whether it's your home debt or investment debt. And as you said, another way of lowering your loan to value ratios and increasing your cash flow is to redevelop a property, whether it's renovation or development. And, despite the fact that we don't like the idea of selling property, sometimes you have to, because the aim of this is to live off your portfolio, live off your property business, not how many properties you own. But people, I've heard Brett say, well, look, I'll buy 10 properties at the end, I'll sell 5, I'll pay down the debt on the others, and then I'll have 5 debt-free. Does that work?
Look, it doesn't work. First of all, it's going to be very, very difficult to get that kind of number of properties anyway to begin with. But, there's a huge amount of capital gains. There's a huge amount of in and out costs that just don't allow it to work. It all seems good in theory, but in practice, it just doesn't and can't eventuate.
Well, the other thing to remember is that if you do sell one of your properties, it's still going to be leveraged at, 70, 80%. So you don't have the whole lot of that money to pay off another property, and especially after you pay tax and all the costs, as you said. So there's another myth, another theory that people say doesn't work. So the idea really, in my mind, if you want to look at what the end game should be, is, if we say begin with the end in mind, you actually need to own your own home in the future with no debt against it. In other words, you can't go into the retirement years, your golden years, with non-deductible debt. You should own a substantial asset base of properties, and we haven't put a number of properties to it, but the concept that it should be substantial. And you should have some debt there. I believe you should still have some leverage, or most people actually need a level of leverage rather than you should have it, but it should be manageable. It should be that if interest rates go up, you're not suddenly caught out when you don't have income coming elsewhere. It should be a low enough loan to value ratio that the banks are going to be happy giving it to you, because currently, unless you can prove serviceability, they're not going to allow you to keep that debt. They're going to ask you to sell it. So with a low enough loan to value ratio, and it depends upon your property, it depends upon the prevailing interest rates, you're going to still have positive cash flow, enough to service your debt. And you are going to need income somewhere else, because when you retire, unless you've paid off all the debt, and that's going to be a bit hard, you're going to have to live off something for a while. Now, it could be shares, it could be managed funds, it could be your superannuation, it could be your commercial property. But what I've found, and again, I'm not allowed to give you advice on superannuation, is that a lot of people actually use their superannuation for the first 5, 10 years or so of their retirement years, and allow their property portfolio to double in value again because they've got good properties. And all of a sudden, by doing that, their loan to value ratio, which may have started the first decade of their retirement at 40% loan to value ratio suddenly becomes 20% loan to value ratio. Suddenly the rents have gone up, the properties are worth more, and they're starting to spin off cash. So you don't necessarily have to live off your property portfolio on day one. But Brett, this takes a lot of planning, and people don't do this, and people just hope. And hope isn't an investment strategy. And that's why I know you and your team actually put a strategic plan together for people to show them what's realistic, what's doable.
Well, I did use that analogy before about it's almost like starting a business. It really is, Michael. It's about taking that step back and understanding what's required and setting things up properly. You wouldn't just go off and buy a business if you liked, ice creams or donuts. You'd actually do the research. You'd take a step back. You'd assess all the information at hand. You'd plan with the end in mind. You'd set up cash flow buffers and then you'd execute the strategy. So that's exactly what we do for our clients with the strategic property plan.
Sure. Now, some people are asking, well, will the bank still lend me money following that model? And the answer is, I don't know. I don't know what the bank lending facilities are going to be then. But you actually are getting income. You got the passive income of the growth of your property portfolio. You don't pay tax on that. But again, the banks won't lend against that. You're going to have your rental income, but you're also going to have, as we already mentioned, shares, dividends, commercial property superannuation income as well. So you're going to have a cash machine, because what we like to do is build you a portfolio that is going to be a perpetual cash machine, rather than what I think a lot of financial planners aim at initially, of just having a nest egg and eating away at it and hoping that you don't live long enough that you outlive your nest egg, Brett.
Which is dangerous at the moment, because obviously life expectancy and technology and things like that's going to get longer, but not necessarily the nest egg that people are saving. So it's very important to look beyond that, yeah.
Brett, but I know there's some people who are going to say, hey, I can't wait 20 years. I can't wait 30 years. I want to live off my property portfolio sooner. Now, these are the sort of questions that clients are asking when they sit in front of our property strategists, and people are leaving on our websites. And that's partly the reason we've got this particular podcast episode today, to answer the common question. I think if somebody else has asked this, you're probably wondering too, I don't want to wait that long. Is there any advice you can give me to speed things up? Now, I know if you sat in front of Warren Buffett would pull out his quote and he would actually say, wealth is the transfer of money from the impatient to the patient. But if you haven't got a chance to speak to Warren Buffett and you speak to Brett Warren, what would you say, Brett?
I'd probably say the same quote, Michael, to be honest. But look, property is not a get-rich-quick scheme, and I think that's where a lot of people get caught out, Michael. They're looking for the short-term scenario, the quickest way to build wealth with as little input and information as possible. I think that's what people are looking for. So it is a longer-term process, and you obviously don't want to take certain risks along the way, because as we can see at the moment, every 8 to 10 to 12 years, there's always a reset button. So you don't want to get caught out. There are a number of ways to do it. I really think, getting back to what we spoke about before, actually having a plan and sitting together with someone every year and making sure that you're on track. If you are on track, great. It gives you a certain level of comfort. If you're not on track, well, what do you have to do to get back on track? So having the ability to do that with someone, it can be invaluable. But I guess by speeding the process up, the first thing is, I often sit with people who have properties and they're happy to hold those properties, but they may only be performing at 2 or 3% with regards to capital growth. So yeah, you're going to probably be taking 30 years in that case. But if you can correctly execute a strategy and correctly allocate those funds appropriately, so you're getting 5, 6 or 7% return, first of all, your money's going to be working harder for you. So it's going to happen a lot quicker. Obviously, we talk about and promote adding value a lot. And I think especially in the next 5 years, when inflation and wages growth is going to be quite low, I think it's very important to have that aspect and that element to your portfolio, because if you're relying on the market to do heavy lifting, it's not going to happen as quickly in the next 5 years. But if you've got the ability to add some value and speed the process up and manufacture some growth, I think it's going to be a lot quicker, and that compounding effect moving on is quite substantial in a 10 or 15 year period.
So I think it does take time, and the compounding is a good point to make, because the longer you hold your properties, if they're the right properties and they keep growing, the quicker the growth is. It compounds on the compound. It's not like those lilies in the lily pond that the first time it doubles and the second time it doubles again and only fills up half the pond, but the next time the whole pond is filled up. It's just the way things grow. Now, there are other ways of, speeding things up, and that is to find the next hotspot. The trouble is it doesn't work because we've found that with the mining towns, with regional areas, with other things. In the short term, it will seem like you've done well, but in the long term, you're going to be left behind. It's not going to work. So I guess that's the reason most property investors fail. It's not easy, and we just know the stats, the statistics prove that most people who buy property are not going to have enough behind them to live off in the future. So if you do what everyone else does, if you listen to who everyone else listens to, you're just not going to build the wealth that you're looking for or you deserve. It's just not the way property works. So it's just like people come in and say, interestingly, on Facebook yesterday, a really nice guy, he asked me some nice questions. He's got $500. He's got $500 and he wants to invest in property. I thought you know me well enough, but seriously. So he's wanting to get into crowdfunding, and I gave him the courtesy, as I do as when people communicate with me, and ask why. So he thought, well, I've got $500, but I've sort of heard that crowdfunding means that you don't have to go to the banks. You can bypass the banks and you can borrow, but you can buy properties with no money at all. It's just not the way it works. Property investment, unfortunately, is for reasonably wealthy, but for financially astute people, for people who are financially literate and who know how to manage their cash flow. Because if you get into property and you haven't got the basics of cash flow management, you get yourself into trouble, Brett.
Yeah, just the point you raised earlier, Michael, you said it's not easy. I actually disagree. I think the process and the fundamentals, it's a very simple process, but I think the difficulty comes when people become impatient, they don't see results, they don't stick to a plan, they're not sure where they're heading, they're attracted to a shiny object over here that claims they can do it in 2 or 3 years, and they lose that focus. So I think it's a very, very simple process if you've got a plan and a strategy, but the hard part is having the mental ability to stay the course.
So I stand corrected. It's simple, but it's not easy. And why it's not easy is because human emotion gets in the way, fear and greed. And why I'm saying that is because we've all had those emails and they've come around again. We're having difficult times in the market, but I know the secret, they tell you. Come along to my masterclass, my webinar, and you'll be able to get into property and you'll take advantage of this or that. It doesn't work that way, does it? Human emotion gets in the way.
That's right.
Now, Brett, the last question I'd like to put you in this particular session, and we've got another one coming up with our business partner, Kate Forbes, who's going to answer a whole lot of other questions that have been left on our website and the clients are asking us is, I've left my run late. I'm now in my 50s. Is it too late to build wealth through property?
Look, potentially. I'll leave that. I believe that, getting back to some of the points you raised earlier, you've probably got another 10 or so years of your working life left. So I think there's the ability to make that start and to build that asset base. Probably not going to retire in that 10 or 15 year period, but if you can then substitute some of your other, maybe your superannuation or some other funds to get through that extra cycle. So we always talk about time in the market. So obviously, clearly, 20-year period in the market is going to be greatly beneficial than just 10 years in the market. So I do believe they've got time. I like to say, look, I believe you have time, but you just can't afford to get it wrong. There's good news and there's bad news. You may have time, but you just can't afford to get it wrong.
That's a really good point because we all make mistakes when we start. You have, I have, and time covers up those mistakes. But if you've got a short runway, you can't afford to get it wrong. But there is a way of insuring yourself, and that's to follow a proven strategy and get a good team of people around you. And some people would say, hey, I can't afford that. How can I afford to pay for a property strategic plan? How can I afford to pay a buyer's agent when I've only got a short period of time? I want to use all my money in the property. Well, the answer is, how can you afford not to do that? Because if you were to try and do it on your own and you just get the results everyone else does, you're not going to do well. I guess the other thing I'd be suggesting to people who ask this sort of question is, why have you left it 50 years to think about property? And again, life gets in the way. You have kids, you get divorced along the way, you've got businesses to run. But clearly the people who leave it a long time are probably, with all due respect to somebody listening to this, not as financially fluent as those who've already done something and given it a go. All the more reason if you're leaving it late. You could be very, very good at your profession, very good at your job, very good as a mum or a dad, but you're probably not as financially fluent as somebody who's had a go, got it wrong, done it again. And so all the more reason to get a team on your side to help you to actually, well, as you said a moment ago, it's easy if you know how. I think the other thing is you can't count on the government moving forward. We don't know what's going to happen. And maybe you're not going to be able to retire at 60. Maybe you're not going to be able to retire at 65. In the old days, people used to retire in those days because most of us did physical jobs, worked hard, your body gave out. Today, a lot of the jobs are in the knowledge industry and desk-related jobs. So actually having to retire, especially when you've got another 40 years ahead of you, maybe knowing that you've got another 34 years ahead of you, you better not stop your day job too soon because you could end up on the pension. And Brett, I'm told dog food doesn't taste very good.
No, that's right. But I guess just giving you a real life example here, Michael, for another reason as well is I know you take a lot of pride in leaving a legacy for your kids, and you're looking after your grandkids. You mentioned before now. I'm working with a lot of clients who are at that stage of their life, and they do want to set their kids up. They realise they may not have enough time to build that asset base, when I probably think most of them probably do. But we're looking beyond a 15 or 20 year period to potentially a 25 or 30 year period that they can actually benefit their kids and their grandkids as well. So I think that legacy is a very important part of why people come to us to invest as well.
That's a really good point, Brett, because really I'm not investing for me anymore. I'm not even investing for my kids. I'm actually investing, as you say, for my grandkids. We're also investing to be able to give back to the community and to charity. And I know you recognise we do that in a number of ways. So I believe it's important to think about long-term wealth, to think about lifetime wealth, and think about leaving a legacy. And how do you do that? Well, right from the beginning, we said you start with the end in mind. Now, we're living in interesting, challenging times. The world around us keeps throwing challenges at us, but there's nothing new about that. Interestingly, as you said a while ago, Brett, every 8 to 10 years something goes wrong. I heard a nice expression a little while ago that the world breaks every decade. Yeah. And it does. And we get it better again and we fix it up, but things will go wrong. So when we do a plan, we can't give people 40-year spreadsheets and tell them exactly what's going to go on. Then that's unrealistic, even though I know some people like that concept. But I believe it is a good time today to get a customized, personalized strategic property plan built for you. And that's what Brett's team and my team at Metropole do. Our property markets are being hit from all directions, but it's a good time to review your current portfolio to see if what you're doing is going to get you to where you want to get to update or even change your property strategy. Now, I'm not suggesting you change it if it's the right strategy, because I know Brett and I haven't changed our strategies and we don't recommend a change to our clients. But if you're not heading in the right direction, as you said, Brett, some people are sitting on properties that don't work as well as they want, formulate a plan, understand where you're going to get to. So if you're serious about growing your wealth, please go to metropole.com.au and find out about our strategic services. Maybe building a plan, it may be using Brett's team to buy you a property or a home, wealth advisory, property management, renovations, development, financial planning. We believe today in these challenging markets, you need more than a buyer's agent. You need even more than a property strategist. You need a holistic approach to your wealth. And it starts with planning to become the person you plan to become, and then allow us to implement that plan. We have a framework that's tested, that's stood the test of time, known, proven, trusted. So go to metropole.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes. And Brett and I'd love to be part of your wealth creation strategy. And even though you're a national director and manage our buyers agents team, you still speak with clients. So if they are, and even the fact that you're in Brisbane, everyone's doing it on Zoom today anyway, you'd be happy to have a chat with people who are interested in moving to the next level?
Yeah, most definitely. And as you said, Michael, just because I'm based in Brisbane, as you know, we make decisions based on facts, data, and numbers. We're numbers people, numbers nerds. So it's not a gut feel or an instinct. It's a proven strategy.
Well, actually, I think that's a really good point. So it's evidence-based advice we're giving. And just the fact that you're in Brisbane, in fact, I know only 2 days ago, one of your clients, Paul, we bought him a property in Melbourne for his super fund. And it was a great property too. Just because he's in Brisbane, if his budget allows something different, we'll put them elsewhere as well. So I guess that's one of the great benefits. Metropole.com.au. Brett, we only got through, I had this whole list, a couple of pages of common questions people ask, and we only got through a short number of them. So can we catch up again real soon and do another session?
Absolutely. I think Kate will be able to help you with the rest of those, Michael. She's very good.
Okay, well, we'll have Kate and we'll have you back again because there's so many. Catch up with you again real soon. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, Michael.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
Today, I'm going to share a bit of a heavier mindset session with you. But pay attention. I hope you'll get some benefit from it. And I'm calling it 3 reasons why you are not your thoughts. Let's go through it. Number 1, the concept I'd like to get across is that your mind's not a camera, it's a projector. Now, what do I mean by that? Look in the mirror. What do you see? You should see your face. But how would you describe it to somebody? Perhaps the person in the mirror is a young person filled with energy, yet also wise with age. The way we see and describe anything is different for every person. We all have our unique experiences and our past conditioning. We're bringing along all that baggage with us. As Michael Neal writes in his book, The Space Within, we live in a world of thought, but we think we live in the world of external experience. The mind's not a camera, it's a projector, he says. We can't tell the difference between an imagined experience in here in your mind and what's really going on out there in the outside world. And that confusion creates a lot of confusion. You see the world as you are, not as it is. And that's part of the reason I spend time discussing these mindset messages with you, so that we get a realistic understanding of what's going on in your head, because the outside world won't change until your inside world does. You've heard me say it before. It's in my Rich Habits, Poor Habits book, and in the podcasts I do. We're all walking around with one foot on an accelerator and one on the brake. We've got empowering beliefs and we've got disempowering beliefs. So we're not really seeing the world as the world is, but we're seeing it as we are due to all our preconditioning, the beliefs, the good and the bad that we carry with us. So understanding what's right and what's wrong is ultimately a matter of perception. So how do you envisage the outside world? How do you assess what's going on there? And as I started to say, it's because of the reticular activating system, the conditioning that you've got that filters things. So we see the world as we are, not as it really is. So I guess step 1, I'm trying to mention about the 3 reasons that you're not your thoughts, and that you've got to change your thoughts so that we can actually move forward, is that your mind's a projector. It's not a camera. Of course, perception is reality. So if you imagine something to be as it is, then that's your reality. Okay. The second concept I'd like to get across today is that you're constantly going through a system upgrade. If I asked you who you are, you'd likely to start with what you do for a living, or recite a list of your past achievements, or where you've been, or what your values are. But who is the person behind those beliefs, behind those thoughts, behind those ideas? Who are you now, right now, in this moment? It's important to ask this, because where you want to be, where you want to take your profession, your business, your life, your investments, is going to require a different version of you to show up. Remember, your personal wealth will never outgrow your personal growth. So for you to get to the next level, you're going to have to grow to become a different person. Often you need to rip out all your old belief systems that worked, but it only got you to where you got to now, and you've got to build new ones that are relevant. Because if you don't like system upgrades, you're going to be like that BlackBerry, or remember that old phone that's faced extinction. Interestingly, that's why I have had a mentorship program for over 15 years to help people understand their internal wealth operating system, to upgrade their thermostat. And that's one of the extra things that we do at Wealth Retreat. One of the first things we actually do at Wealth Retreat, which is going to be held in November this year, we're going to actually work on people's empowering beliefs and limiting beliefs. So we've got to clear all out the limiting beliefs, instill a whole lot of new empowering beliefs, do a system upgrade on them, and then, and only then, are they going to be able to take advantage of all the information that we give them to help them. Okay, the third point I just want to get across, or the 3 points I want to get across to you today in this mindset session is pain can feel crippling, or you can use it as a stimulus to growth. In their best-selling book, The Tools, the authors, who are also psychotherapists, said, your experience of pain changes relative to how you react to it. When you move towards it, pain shrinks. When you move away from it, pain grows. If you flee from it, pain pursues you like a monster in the dream. The more pain you can tolerate, the more you can learn. Now, the same sentence could be true if you replace the word pain with fear. Pain and fear will surprise you if you're open to possibilities without knowing how things will unfold. If things are tough right now for you, they won't last. If things are good, unfortunately, they won't stay good forever. The important thing to ask yourself is, what's the lesson in this? Because when you stop living in your thoughts, life becomes an experience. Well, this was the first in a series of podcasts answering the common questions investors are asking us about what's happening in our property markets and the economy at the moment. In the next episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, I'll be back with one of my other business partners, Kate Forbes, National Director of Metropole, to answer a lot of your questions as well. Now, if you got some benefit from today's show, why not tell somebody else who'd also benefit? Because my aim in these challenging times, but it's been my aim for 2 decades now, is to help as many people become as financially successful through property investment, through good financial management, or by doing well in their businesses. So use the share button on the podcast app you're listening to. And if you want to tell the world how much you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate you leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to this. Now, I got a good one a short while ago from Tess Carl. Left it on Apple Podcasts. Short and sweet, saying, always informative. Another great podcast. Thank you for the good work. So, Tess Carl, if you send me an email, michael@metropole.com.au, with your details, I'd like to say thank you by gifting you one of my books. And if I read out your review, 1 star, 5 star, I don't mind. Well, I sort of do mind, but I actually only seem to be getting 5-star reviews. If I read out yours, I'll be happy to say thank you and gift you a book as well. As I said, I'll be back again real soon with the second in this series of question and answer podcasts, helping you make some sense of the current markets. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?